podcast where we discuss the people, places, and events all around Kestrel Country.
Cynthia King, welcome to the Kestrel Country podcast.
Thank you.
I'm very excited. We've tried to get Cynthia on for a little bit, and that's because you're going to have to correct me. You just told me it was the Historical Preservation
Commission
for
the city of Moscow. The city has a few different commissions, quite a few really, and this one is for historic preservation.
So we are excited to jump in and talk about that. But before we do, we want to learn a little bit about you.
Okay.
So tell us what brought you to Moscow.
My parents did. I was born in Pullman, and after being there 5 years, my dad was finishing up at Washington State University. He got a job over here with the Forest Service doing research, and so we moved to Moscow. And I was in Moscow until after college when my husband and I moved to Montana for 20 years. And then after that, we came back to help my parents out to pursue education for our son. So it was sort of like 25 years Moscow, 20 years Montana. Now it's been another 21 back in Moscow.
Oh, wow.
So definite ties here.
Yes.
Yes. And I'm just really thankful to be here. I love the tucked in feeling that you get in the hills around Moscow. Mm-hmm. The fact that the agriculture is close, but you can get to Moscow Mountain and the ridges to the east outside of Beauville Dairy for huckleberry picking or firewood chopping or whatever you need to do, hiking, fishing. My son and I do tend to return to Montana to fly fish.
You prefer Montana fly fishing?
I do.
Okay.
I'm more familiar with it, I would say. Mm-hmm. And there are a few particular streams that we fished when we were over there, and they still are pretty dear to our hearts.
We won't dig in and find out where they are.
No. I would try to be pretty general.
Which is how it should be with a fishing hole. We haven't fly fished Montana, but we've done the North Fork of the Clearwater.
Yes.
Which is gorgeous. And we go up and drive through Montana and then come back into Idaho.
Yes.
Typically to get there.
Yes.
But it would be fun to go try Montana fly fishing. We're headed to Whitefish this summer for our family trip, which will be
wonderful.
a first.
It's a beautiful area. It has grown so much in the 20 years that we've been gone. I returned one or two times, and there are a couple places that were medium-sized towns, but still kind of sleepy when we were there. Bozeman, if you can believe it. And Bozeman has just really, really grown. But we're happy to be in Moscow and be close to Montana, because Montana has that big sky, rip the roof off the world feeling. And Moscow has a tucked into a quilt feeling.
I like that. Yeah, it does. You're right.
Does. And I like them both. Mm-hmm. And I'm thankful for them both.
And it's not that far. I mean, skiing at Lookout, you're on the border right there between them.
Exactly.
It's fun. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's dive into what you do on the commission.
Okay. There are spots for 9 commissioners. I think we have one opening, maybe 2 right now. So if anyone is interested in Moscow's history or historic neighborhoods, preservation of those, you are welcome to apply. You can go on our website. If you just Google Moscow Historic Preservation Commission, it comes up.
Okay.
And I think one of the things I would like to talk about is a flyer that we put together as a commission in the last couple of years that's for Moscow homeowners as a resource for them. Moscow doesn't have regulations. The city hasn't installed regulations. Some people would say imposed regulations on what can be done in historic districts. Moscow right now has 2 historic districts. Downtown is a historic district, and then the Fort Russell area, which is among the older parts of town. There are other parts that are as old, but it generally goes from 3rd Street north to D and from Hayes Street west to Maine-ish.
Okay.
But the borders are very irregular. But you can find it online too.
Yes.
The city has not, the city council has not been requested or pressured to impose regulations for what can be done to homes, at least on the outside in historic districts. We on the commission are mostly happy with that. We'd rather educate people and let them do what they want themselves. But there are other historic preservation interests in town, in the county, and in the state that would like to see Moscow have those regulations because they see some things that are done in historic districts or older districts, even if they're not labeled historic, that are not don't respect the history of the neighborhood, the history of the home, and therefore the beauty, in essence, of people walking by or the neighbors who live there, and also do not improve economic value, resale value. If you're trying to sell your home and the people across the street have put a roof addition on a beautiful home that looks more like a wart or a bump or something, a person will look at that. It's for some people, it's like having the auto parts place across your street where little old junkers are brought in to farm for parts. It just can mar the consistent look of a neighborhood.
Oh, for sure. And home value, we see that, if there is a home that's just falling down over here and then this one in the middle between two, crumbling homes is all cute.
Yes.
That's going to play a factor in how much it can sell.
Right.
Whereas if you move that home across town into a neighborhood that's all been remodeled, it'll be totally different.
Yes.
Which that's that old adage. It's location, location, location.
Yes. And I think Moscow in the last couple of years has been seeing a lot of relative for Moscow growth, a lot of new people coming in. And I think Moscow is not as obviously characteristic of a particular time as somewhere like Ipswich, Massachusetts would be, or certain Asheville, North Carolina has a very Art Deco neighborhood. And Moscow's is a little less obvious.
It's very eclectic.
Yes.
Yes.
And so people don't realize that actually there are areas that border Main Street, mostly to the east, but even some to the west, the Asbury, Almond, Llewellyn streets, that were some of the first homes built here in the 1880s, 90s. When you get up into the Fort Russell area east of Moscow, it probably goes as late as about 1940, 1950. And then as you go further east beyond Hayes and you get down into Blaine, Garfield, Cleveland, you have some really fine examples of 1950s, 60s homes.
Absolutely.
And those aren't always perceived as being classics of their time. They look like little boxes, but some of them have really distinctive fat fireplaces and brick that goes around the front door that continues that fireplace. It's kind of the mid-century modern that some people are rediscovering now.
Yes, and it can be popular.
Yes.
Really popular.
And can be really lovely. Sometimes you want to think about trying to highlight what hasn't been highlighted in that home that makes it even a more distinctive example of its time.
And it can make it a more affordable way to do it too.
Yes.
In terms of coming in and seeing something and being like, man, this home, I can't add, $100,000 to knock this whole half down and redo it.
Right.
But focusing on it, painting a fireplace,
Yes.
it can just change the feel completely.
Yes. Or if you don't like the color of the fireplace, there are some of those that are kind of a pale pinkish. But sometimes the home color can be used to tone that pink look down. And it might be historically appropriate because in the 50s, they were painting homes kind of that dull green or I don't know, not exactly a mustard, but some of those slightly earth tone colors, but they tone down the pinkishness of that pinkish stone fireplace, chimney, front door look that some people now just kind of clutch at. And I think I would encourage people to try to pause and look at the home that they might have and might want to be improving. Look at the neighborhood it's in. Get online. Online has so many resources to try to get some ideas of how you can use what is classic about the home of its era to inexpensively enhance that rather than changing it to where it maybe is something you think you like, but you might like what's more historically appropriate for the neighborhood if you just pause and think and research a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. It is a good idea to do a lot of research. It takes time.
It does.
And paint colors for sure.
Yes.
Take time.
Yes.
And trial and error.
Yes. The commission did prepare this little flyer that a good number of the realtors in town have copies of that they've been handing out for maybe a year now. One side of it talks about welcome you to Moscow. It talks about where some of the historic neighborhoods are. And they do go farther out. Ridge Road on the south end of town is quite classic, 50s, 60s, up into the 70s. And so down near the fairgrounds, there are off of Blaine and Couse and Camas, there are some very cool examples of 50s, 60s homes. Let's see. So
before we leave the front side of this,
yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the homes that have either painted in the historical way that they were originally? Are these examples of the ones that, they like Carol Ryrie Brink's home, for example, very iconic.
Yes. And it's in the Fort Russell Historic District. It's on the corner of Polk and I believe it's A Street. It's A or B I think it's A on the corner. And it's a very whimsical Queen Anne cottage style. And that means it has a bay window or bow window or just a main window with a dormer and a gable over it that's in the front. And then next to that where the door is the porch. And it's the Queen Anne was a very asymmetrical, whimsical style. And in this case, what's wonderful about it is up in the dormers often Queen Anne, and especially Queen Anne cottages had the shingles. And this Carol Ryrie Brink home particularly accents those shingles with even like an ombre gradation of the paints from white to light pink to dark pink. And then the home is a medium pink. There are other areas that are highlighted with dark pink. There are some Victorian homes that may have those shingles up in the dormer, and people are timid maybe about doing the riotous colors that the Victorians really did. We tend to think of those big old homes, oh, they must be white.
Well, I think we also have the black and white photos. So to try to imagine anything in color, it's really tricky.
Yes, exactly. But this is an example showing that, the Victorians really weren't afraid of color. And even in their, especially maybe in the different areas that they had, the trim around their windows was usually dark. And then just the different parts of the home were variations of colors. And
is this one what it was when originally built, or?
I think it was because there was a book written by a local woman who was an amateur historian in the early 80s. Her name was Lillian Ottness. The book is A Great Good Country. It's not in print now. If anybody wants to fund printing it again, it would be a really handy resource. You sometimes can find them used online.
Okay.
And she does refer to this house and one that's 2 doors south of it. They were called the Pink Houses. And this one was owned by Carol Ryrie Brink's dad. And the 2 houses to the south was owned by her uncle. Oh. It has been heavily remodeled and doesn't look like this one. Apparently, they both looked a lot like this when they were first built. But it's nice to still have this one. And so just to encourage people with Victorian homes that have dormers with shingles, not to be afraid to consider not painting it all white or all gray, but to do some fun things with the colors of your home. It is perhaps more expensive to buy more variations of paint and colors of paint rather than all white. But paint compared to other things is relatively cheap.
Right, in terms of a remodel.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the paint side of it can be more affordable. It's interesting. We were just in Williamsburg for spring break.
Oh, fun. Yes.
And so speaking of paint, that came up quite a bit because it was expensive to have colors, certain colors. And so that bright green, the Kermit green.
Yes. Interiors.
Interior.
Right? Yes.
This
not
was an
exterior.
interior.
Yeah.
That Kermit green was a sign of wealth.
Yes.
Because of the process to
Yes.
make it.
Yes.
So, and of course, they wanted to show that.
Yes. Yes. And I think it was also an indication of what science was developing and finding. I had read where one of Thomas Jefferson's homes that the historians had painted a muted blue, some room. More recently, it's been painted this bright chromium yellow.
Oh.
And people walked in and were kind of stunned, horrified, whatever. But research had showed that, yes, Jefferson, who was all for the latest avant-garde thing, let's try this, let's do that, look at what they're doing now, had used that color in that room.
That's fun.
Yeah. There's a home on the corner of C and Polk in Moscow, which is a wonderful corner there's a colonial revival home, a giant, I don't know what you call the Mark Miller home. It's a craftsman on steroids or something. And then a sort of a colonial revival that almost looks Southern antebellum. And then the fourth house that I think sometimes is overlooked because it's set back a little farther in some trees is a real Victorian with two porches, and it's painted this almost purple blue and almost lime green yellow. But when you read the earlier history about it, its colors are blue and yellow.
Okay.
And, I remember as a child going by that intersection and thinking, why did those people do that? That's so hideous. And then come to find out, well, because that's more accurate. That's actually what it looked like.
The trends, it's so funny. It's fun to dig in and find out
Yes.
the why behind some of it, or sometimes it's just preference.
Yes.
But even now, of course, to see trends, colors are such a trendy thing. We pick a color of the year and,
Yes.
all of that is involved with it.
Yes. Part of, I think, what sparked the commission to do this flyer is we had seen a few homes, older homes, painted black. And we were kind of like, why did they do that? It was surprising and didn't seem, it's not like they were magnificent, standout examples of their period. They were smallish homes, but still black is has been a real popular, trendy current color.
Yes.
Some of the big farmhousey looking homes that are either painted almost all white with black trim
Or all black.
or all
now.
black.
Yeah,
Yes.
for
or
sure.
such a dark gray with black trim that they look all black.
Right.
And so seeing a couple of homes on the edges of some of the older districts painted that color. And I don't think there's any historical reason for that. I think it's just because it's been trendy. So the commission kind of discussed it and thought, well, that's the kind of thing that might make some preservationists say, see, we need rules, we need regulations, we need to stop this. And we would rather educate people.
Right. I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
To and just encourage you that not all things require a lot of money. They do require some research and some looking at what might be appropriate possibilities, and then where can I find resources to do those at a reasonable price. Yeah. So anyway, the flyer talks about Moscow's neighborhoods, and there's also a little bit about our Orchid Awards, which are annual awards that the commission presents for usually exterior changes, upgrades to the home that are in keeping with the history of the home and the neighborhood, either returning it to something more historically appropriate, or if it's an addition that's done well, that's not a big box looming behind a cute little cottage,
Right.
That has different siding on it or something you like that.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
That's an extreme example, but we do see that happen sometimes.
We do. And
Yeah.
it's fun when, obviously there's certain upgrades that you really want, you
Yes.
know, and whether it's adding in air conditioning or central heat or all of those things that are
Yes.
going to increase the value of the home and things
Yes.
that way, but how to do it in a way that looks
Yes.
beautiful. And it's interesting. So my great grandparents had the home on the corner of 6th and South Hayes.
Yes.
And then my grandparents built 2 doors down on South Hayes. But a different person had owned that one. And I think in the 70s, they dropped the ceilings.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm not sure if I think those have been raised now. But certain things like that where, there was a trend, kind of back to your point on understanding the bone structure and the architecture of the home and making because upgrades are great, but making them in a way that fits everything, and of course, if you've got tall ceilings, oh man.
Yes. They're wonderful.
They're wonderful.
But they're also more costly to heat.
The heating bill.
I live in an older Queen Anne cottage style home, and the ceilings had been lowered, but the home was built in 1889, so it's pretty old for Moscow. And but they don't think the ceilings were dropped in the 70s when there was the energy crisis and so many people were doing that. They tend to think they were done maybe in the 30s or 40s because of the noise upstairs.
Oh.
And we have since raised them and, or I don't want to say raised them, removed the lowered ceiling that was put in. And when people are upstairs, there are crawl spaces around the edges upstairs. And when children are up there playing and running and crawling, you really can hear it downstairs. So, but I don't mind that. The high ceilings, and it's not like children are up there tromping all the time.
Right.
But those are interior things that make the inside more livable. And the commission really doesn't address those. Again, that's not our responsibility, I guess. It's more the idea of retaining the historic feel of neighborhoods and respect for that and property values. So we look more at the exteriors. And there are additions that have been done that are beautiful or that are hidden in behind. So it's not like you are constrained to the small size or the small rooms. People in my home, I did take down some walls because at the time it was built, it was 3 tiny, tiny rooms that were really pretty claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And it had been remodeled a lot over the years to where even from the front entry, the access to one of the front rooms, you had to go around through all the other rooms to get to it. I don't think that was original, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
and small rooms would have been much more cost effective to heat.
Yes.
Back in the day.
Yes.
Ours was a 1920. We're pretty positive it was a Sears kit house.
Oh, fun. Yes.
So probably would have had to come across on the train.
Yes.
But that difference from being outside of town to inside of town was, wood walls in the inside. And when we started remodeling, there was newspaper, used versus like plaster in town would have probably been more expensive. And so on a farm outside of town, that makes sense.
Yes.
But again, it was smaller rooms. And so we removed walls.
Yes.
Opened it up.
Yes.
That kind of a thing too.
Yes. And that makes the home inside more livable, but you can do that without marring the outside as far as a historical compatibility.
Right. This weird bulge in a funny way where the roof line is not coming in correctly or, that kind of thing.
And then this flyer also talks about the Orchid Awards that the commission presents. And on the flip side, it gives some examples of some of the styles of homes that are in Moscow. Particularly, these address the Fort Russell historic area because that period of building in the Fort Russell covers, 4, 5, 6 decades maybe. So there's quite a variety, and a good chunk of them you might call Victorian, but even the Victorians had a lot of different colonial revival, Gothic revival, Tudor revival. They were hearkening back to old.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Craftsman and Bungalow and Foursquare that are newer styles. And then there are also a list of resources, websites. I've had to go in and change the links on some of those because links change.
They do.
And so these may not be all precisely accurate, but if you just go in and Google historic home styles, historic home style paint colors, there's a New England homes website. There's one from Long Beach, California. There's one from Ipswich, Massachusetts. Even paint companies, Sherwin-Williams, Valspar, Benjamin Moore, they will have historic paint colors.
Which is nice.
It is
because
nice.
it can be so overwhelming to have a ton of paint anyways.
Yes.
So when it's already narrowed down for you,
Yes.
it helps.
And they typically will narrow them down like to a craftsman or a mid-century modern or a particular Victorian eras that help. Because, for example, Greek Revival, which was one of the earlier Victorian styles, I think there are a few of those in Moscow, those homes often are white and should stay white because they were hearkening back to Grecian temples that were, marble or limestone or whatever. And so they weren't the riotous color that you find with some later Queen Anne and other Victorian styles. And even craftsmen have multiple colors, but more muted nature, darker colors. So
No, it's such a fascinating thing to start digging into.
it is for me. And for us on the commission, we want to help encourage people to, even if it's not their thing, if they're going to buy a historic home or a home in an area of a certain age, to try to be respectful of that, because in the long run, it helps them with property value, and it certainly makes their neighbors think more kindly of them.
And there's some choices back then that were not probably the ones you have to pick.
That's right.
Yeah.
If there are extreme things about your home, you can do things to tone those down with paint.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So can you give us a couple examples of orchid winners? I know the house we had listed over on A Street was the Spotswood home. And they had won one for that porch edition they did that faced, was it facing A or was it facing, regardless, the one porch that's on the house.
Okay.
They won an orchid award.
Yes.
So what are some other examples in the recent years?
Oh, let's see if I can even remember.
Yeah.
That's not my strong suit. There was one over on C Street, I think C and Cherry, that was sort of I guess you would call it a bungalow, and it's on our flyer, but it looks like one that could be in the Fort Russell district. But it just is a reminder that when you go west of Main Street, there are neighborhoods there that have some older craftsman, in this case bungalow, style homes, and it has what's called a hip roof. The dormers, instead of being pointed in the front, they bend down, and it's very characteristic. That family added an extension addition a little to the back to the west, and it was really just a long 2-story rectangular box, which was an easy addition to build. But then they echoed the hip roof design. So it looks like the rest of the home and was sided similarly, painted similarly, roofed all the same. So that was an example that we very much appreciated, being outside the Fort Russell area, but also thoughtfully done, not just a box stuck on, but relatively cheap shape to build, but with the proper windows and the hip roof again. Let's see what others.
It's some years ago, but my in-laws, when they owned the Butterfield house on Polk Street, they got an orchid award for their remodel as well.
Yes. Yeah. Now, did they add to the roof in the back? They added some windows, a row of windows.
It was dormers that they bumped it out and really made that upstairs a very usable space.
Yes.
But then it didn't change the look from the front.
Right.
And all of it is just very well done.
Yes. And even from the back, adding that long dormer to the back of a long roof like that is really not uncommon. That was something that people did in colonial times and since then. Or like if you had a home, they did this in England. If you had a home that was a rectangle, it was very frequent that they would extend it when they had more money and needed more room into a T shape with an addition in the back, or an H shape with 2 wings on the side, and it could just keep growing.
Right,
and growing
without
and
it
growing.
looking weird.
Right. It didn't impede the front of the home and its look from the curb. And that one is a good example. My home won one in 2019 And the biggest thing I did to the outside, I would say, was, like I said, it's a Queen Anne cottage style. Over the years, the porch had been removed. And so it was just cement steps with the wrought iron handrails going up to the front door. And when I first saw it, I liked the home. It had been sided with shingles, so it looked a little more like a lake cabin or something. But I really liked it. But just thinking about it, looking at it, I did some research, realized it was a Queen Anne cottage style home, and it really should have a porch. And that was so nice because I remember looking at it and thinking it looked like it was missing teeth or something, and I didn't know why.
Yeah.
And then when I finally looked it up and saw, oh, well, that's why there's no porch anymore. And then also because we had to change that and the siding was old, the shingle siding wasn't really original to it. It would have been more clapboard with possibly the little shingles up in the dormer. And so that's what I went with when we had to recite it.
And with your color choices too.
Yes.
I'm assuming you dug in. And
Yes, I did. The gold on the main part of the home is called Gilded Age because it's from the late 80s, early 90s colors. And then I'm not sure that the aqua blue that I picked is particularly historical. I think theirs were probably either brighter, deeper blues or maybe darker blues.
Okay.
It's just one that I really like. And I knew that if the fellow down the road could have lime green, then I was going to try to have aqua blue.
Yeah.
So I think, again, you go with what is as close to historical as you can, but I did take some liberties there. I wish now when I replaced the windows that I would have put in ones that the interior trim of the windows would have been darker because that was typically in those Victorian homes, the sashes in the windows were the dark highlights, and then the other colors were applied elsewhere.
Okay.
And black or dark blue probably would have been more appropriate for my home. I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
It's a learning process.
Yes.
And we just made this flyer, and it's on the Historic Preservation website. There's an area that's resources down on the right side, and I think it's called Welcome to Moscow.
Okay. Well, and we can put links in the notes too for the podcast.
Okay, good. So it is a learning process, but we just want to encourage people to take a little time, do a little research, give a little thought before you just buy the huge truckload of siding because it's cheap and put it on everything you do or something like that.
or two remnants and use both of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Cynthia, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Winding down here. Is there any last thoughts that you have?
Let me just double check. I don't think so. I think that's mostly just, the Historic Preservation Commission right now is working on a sign about Friendship Square. We have done the signs that are on the old post office, which is now City Hall, the one on our Carnegie Library. We are working on helping this get a national historic preservation designation for that. I call it the swoopy roof building.
Oh, yes, it's on A Street and Main.
The water building, but it was the first savings and loan that was built in Moscow. I remember seeing it in 1963 when I was here, and it first went up and just thinking, what is that?
Yes.
And now I really like it.
Well, it's very iconic.
It is.
And as a kid, it was one of the ones you're like, man, that'd be so fun to slide down,
exactly.
Or sled down in the winter.
Yes, or skateboard. What a skateboard thing.
Exactly.
So that has been recognized statewide, but they're working on getting it recognized nationally.
Wow.
The man who designed it did banks all over California. I think there's another one in southern Idaho, these mid-century.
Interesting.
Yes. So that we are there, there's an effort by some students and classes and architecture and historian folks up at the U of I to get a historic district up there too.
At the U of I.
Yes, with the collegiate Gothic buildings that are the center of the campus. So a lot is going on.
Yeah.
If you're at all interested, I just encourage you to look at the County Historic Society has archives. There are archived Moscow photos at the U of I archives. There's an OTT collection that's fabulous. The county has a wonderful historic preservation commission that is working on things in Derry, Beauville, Troy. Troy has a strong historic preservation group. So if you're interested, it's active and going.
That's fun. Oh, it's fun to learn about it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me and letting
thank
me
you.
encourage people this way.
Well,
we would rather
thanks so much.
encourage them and educate than have restrictions
Yes.
put in place. I think many of us would. Most of us would.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, Cynthia, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next week.